Well, thank you, Mike, for your contribution to the Study Bible. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, how you got into biblical scholarship, and what are your current research interests?
Well, I'm lived most of my life in Australia. I grew up in suburban Brisbane, didn't come from a Christian family, didn't become a Christian until I was 20, and that was when I was serving in the military. And, when I became a Christian, I had to wrestle with a few things like, should Christians go around killing people to the glory of God? Is that a big yes or a hard no? I had to work my way through that. Then I went through seminary. I thought about becoming an army chaplain, but it soon became apparent that my giftings were more on the academic side. So I did a PhD in biblical studies, ended up teaching in a wonderful college in Scotland, Highland Theological College, then taught at the Brisbane School of Theology, and for the last 10 years I've been at Ridley College, where I'm now deputy principal, and I'm an Anglican priest. So that's kind of the main things about me. My research interests are fairly wide-ranging. I've got a New Testament introduction with N.T. Wright. I've done an evangelical theology, commentary on Romans, Philippians, but more recently I've been working on a little bit of political theology. Because this is something I think is very relevant for today. I think the 2020s is one of the most perilous times we've seen since the 1930s. I think war in Ukraine, the terrible situation in Israel, Gaza, more tensions potentially in China and Taiwan, economic turmoil, potential climate change catastrophe, and all that sort of a thing. So it's a real interesting time to be alive, and the church has got to really make its mind up on how it's going to orientate itself to those things. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about.
And so you wrote the notes on politics for the whole New Testament, aside from Revelation. So, which is an incredibly relevant theme now, and especially when it comes to Christianity. I'm coming from the American context, where politics and the church are it's kind of a disaster. It's kind of a big mess, quite honestly. But I'm sure that's true of Christians in other parts of the world. What led to your interest in political theology? I mean, this is something that's fairly recent for you.
Yeah, it hasn't been my main interest. It came about because certainly in Australia we are experiencing not persecution, but we are having a more adversarial relationship between the church and some state authorities. And let me give a good example of that. Recently in Canberra, which is like Australian Capital Territory, there is a government in power, very progressive, and they were very unhappy with a Catholic hospital because it refuses to do abortions and euthanasia. Now, I know these are complicated topics, and people give arguments, for both sides, but this sort of area government in the Australian Capital Territory rushed through legislation so they could coercively seize state control of this hospital. And they also added a little addendum that the police will be empowered to use reasonable force to seize the hospital. And they did it, and there was a few sort of attempts to stop it through legal procedures, but it went through very quickly, very rushed. And I remember seeing them taking down the cross of this hospital. It was called Calvary Hospital. The first thing they did, as soon as they got control of the hospital, they took down the cross on a Sunday. And it looked like a scene from China. And I could not believe what I was seeing. Because I believed we lived in a liberal democracy. In a liberal democracy, you don't take punitive actions at different religious communities because you don't like their religion. That's what I thought. I lived in Australia, but that was not the case. And it's been a number of incidents like that that have made me think about how does the church relate to the state? Is secularism a good thing or a bad thing? I think there are some very good models of secularism that can help defend the religious freedom of churches, and also make sure we don't end up with a kind of Christian nationalistic theocracy either. But then I started thinking, well, that's the Australian context. What about Christians in Myanmar, where there's currently a military dictatorship in power, and where Christianity is the majority religion amongst the minority people? Or what should we think about, or how can we support Christians in Ukraine, or Christians in Russia, Christians in Palestine, Christians in Israel, or somewhere like Egypt? And I wanted to think about political theology, with an eye on to some of my American friends and the unique suite of issues you happen to be confronting. But I didn't want to make it a book about political theology that's simply viewed through the lens of Trump and abortion and Roe versus Wade, because I think political theology is far more than that. We've got to take a global perspective. And that's the sort of thing I'm interested, which is why I also loved contributing to the notes to this study Bible, because I think we do need to have some political questions. We need to have some lenses. We need to have some tools so we can think about what it means to read the Bible in light of our local political context, but also the wider global political context.
Well, that's helpful. What would you say to somebody? This comes up a lot, I think, in at least the American evangelical context, where you have this assumption that you have politics that are kind of over there, and then over here is Christianity, the Bible, the church, and the Bible addresses, spiritual themes. It helps us to learn how to preach the gospel, to pray, to live moral individual lives. And then sometimes when we think about politics, it's like we just put on an entirely different hat that's usually influenced by our favorite political party. Anyway, the whole point is, like, some people just intuitively separate politics from the Bible. What would you say to that person that does that?
At one level, it's right, because you don't want politics to become your religion. And you don't want to make it that the purpose of my religion is just to provide religious capital to my politics. That's what we don't want. But at the same time, the church has never been, and never can it afford to be, apolitical. Okay? Look at William Wilberforce. Look at Martin Luther King. These civil rights movements, these activist movements, were religiously motivated, religiously based. They spoke into a political context with the voice of faith. They spoke truth to power. Now, everyone's happy with that. I'm happy for the church to be the angry prophet on the margins speaking truth to power. But here's my challenge for some of my friends. What then do you do when the power listens? When the power says, you know what? We want you to sit on a committee. We love your non-profit. We want to fund it with government resources. In fact, maybe you could run for local council. You could run for the Senate. You've got to have that question. And if you want to change the game, you've got to have skin in the game. Now, there's the danger there, isn't there? Because you come into the political theater with the best of motives, but then you've got to fundraise. Then you've got to, be all things to all people. Then you've got to make decisions. And sometimes you've got to compromise to make things pass and get through. And it is a morally fraught space. But that doesn't mean we have to withdraw from it. And I think Christians should be politically active, politically involved, as long as they have a healthy understanding that that politics only has instrumental value, not ultimate value. Ultimate value comes from God. It's God who appoints all political powers, but we can be active and involved in the political atmosphere, the political framework that we find ourselves in.
I've heard it said that the gospel is not partisan, but it is political. Do you agree with that? And what is that? How would you unpack that?
Well, you have heard that said, but I say unto you, Preston, I say unto you, we're not meant to be partisan in the human sense, but we are to be partisan in the kingdom sense. Now, I would say we are to build for the kingdom. Here I'm riffing off a bit of N.T. Wright. So I don't think we can ever fully identify our own works with the kingdom of God. But what I say is what we are doing is anticipatory. It's a foretaste, it's a preview of what the kingdom will look like. So when we help create good government, I think we are providing a foretaste of what the kingdom of God is like. When we speak about injustices, when we're able to do things about housing, when we're able to establish a greener and cleaner future for our children, I have no problem saying we're doing kingdom work. But it's not the ultimate expression on the kingdom. Because when we get to the kingdom of God, it's not going to say from new creation, from the same people who brought you New York. Okay, we can't manufacture it on our own effort, but I think we can, work and build for it as an anticipation. And in that sense, we have to be more than partisan. We have to be deeply committed and see that as a task of discipleship.
That's good. What are some of the key biblical, let's just stick with the New Testament, some key New Testament passages that, for you at least, that they contribute to your understanding of politics or political theology. And this is kind of, I have in the back of my mind again, somebody who thinks that the Bible rarely, if ever kind of addresses politics. I think both you and I would agree that there's a lot more there that if we understand what we mean by politics, there's a lot more there than people realize. So yeah, what are some passages, themes that maybe go unnoticed by Christians that contribute to a political theology?
Yeah, well, I mean, the obvious one is Romans 13,
Right.
verses 1 to 7, where Paul says some things that are jarring. Like we should submit to governing authorities, and we should pay to them taxes, that type of thing. It seems as if Christians should be subordinate and subservient to the governing bodies of the day. Now, I think that Paul's writing that in a specific context. He lives in a world where, even bad government is better than anarchy. Because when it's anarchy, it's, the strong dominate the weak, okay? And he knows that the powers are only put there by God. He knows they're only temporary. He also knows one day they're going to be set aside. So as a kind of least worst option, don't kick the hornet's nest. Be the grey man, stay under the radar. I think that type of thing. So I think he's doing that. But that is a general piece of advice. I don't think it applies into every single situation. I think there are situations where we should not be obeying governing authorities, where we should be disobeying governing authorities. And you see that in the book of Acts. When the apostles, when Peter says, when they're told to stop preaching the gospel, we've got to obey God rather than mere men. Okay, and then when Paul and his crew get to Thessalonica, they're told that this is this sort of messianic rabble who's going around saying that there is a king other than Caesar, and they've been turning the world upside down. Sometimes we need to submit to governing authorities. Sometimes, we need to turn the world upside down. We need to make a mess. We need to make some noise. We need to become a holy nuisance, so that the government, like the unjust judge in the parable of the widow, who keeps saying, "Give me justice! Give me justice!" And the judge gives in, not because he's grown a conscience, because he's tired of being badgered. And so sometimes that's got to be us. We have to badger the wicked to give us justice, or justice for the people who need it most of all. I mean, those are these little clips we get around the New Testament that speak into a political theology, or at least give us some of the materials we can start to use to put together a political theology.
That's good. Make sure you get that in the final too, by the way. Would you say that the New Testament, let's get a little edgy here, a little spicy. Do you think the New Testament supports a more right-wing social vision or a more left-wing social vision? Like, should Christians who take the New Testament seriously be, in my context, it would be, Republican or Democrat? You have left and right-wing, a different kind of political system there. But what side does the New Testament fall on?
Well, it doesn't fall on any side. And I mean that the categories of left and right depend on where you are. Like in my country, in Australia, I'm considered a moderate conservative. I come to America, I'm considered a radical socialist. So I'm not a big fan of the NRA or Planned Parenthood, to be perfectly honest. And that I just do not map onto your context. So the left and right divide is when we're trying to read the New Testament or the Bible in general through the lens of our own little true or false sort of questionnaire. But the Bible transcends it, because the left-right divide is so contingent on the political culture we're in. And in many ways, I think it forces us to transcend that. And the reason why people will say the Bible leans left or the Bible leans right is when they're reading the Bible through the lens of their own political tribalism. And that is nasty. Okay, that is bad, that is dangerous. Whether you lean to the left or you lean to the right, if you read the Bible in such a way that it always comes out supporting your political tribe, I would argue you're not reading the Bible, you're reading your tribe into the Bible, and the Bible then simply becomes a commodity. It becomes a prop that's useful to your political tribe. And that's very dangerous. You know, wherever you are on the political spectrum, if the Bible is just a prop for your leader, your party, or your own little tribe, that's not healthy. And we need to be allergic to that. And the best thing we can do is talk to people who live outside our context, who beyond our own tribal divides, and see how they read the Bible politically.
That's good, yeah. Yeah, especially for Americans, we get so stuck in our Americanism, sometimes we don't realize there's other countries out there that have quite different social and political contexts.
Yeah, there is a place, it's called the rest of the world. They do things differently there.
Yeah. Can you give us a concrete example of maybe how the New Testament might support a social value that might resonate more with like a right-wing kind of position, and maybe another that resonates more with a left-wing, just as an example to show us that you just can't take the New Testament and make it squarely line up on every issue that's either right or left-wing.
Okay. Every Western country, except for America, that has been shaped by Christian values has opted for a system of universal health care. I mean, from Norway to New Zealand.
You're going to go there, good.
I'm going to go there, everywhere. And because their Christian heritage has propelled them to do this. The reason all these countries have universal health care is not because they've been inspired by Marx, but rather they've been inspired by the Gospel of Matthew, okay? And the central figure you find there. And that's it. America is, one of the wealthiest countries in the world with one of the worst healthcare provisions. I know that I was just watching CNN about some poor woman. Her healthcare company won't give her enough funding for her cancer treatment. The number one cause of bankruptcies in your country is medical bankruptcies. We don't have that in Australia. If they filmed the TV show Breaking Bad in Australia, it would be one episode. The guy gets sick and he goes to the hospital and he gets free healthcare. No drug lab required to fund his medical treatment. I mean, it'd be very boring, but at least the guy would have lived through it. So I think, this is the number one example. Every other country with Christian heritage in the Western world has universal healthcare. But let's go the other way. Let's go the more progressive side of things, if you like. Okay. One thing we can also say that the Bible teaches, I think, that the value of a wholesome and affirming sexual ethic. Now, I mean, sexual ethics is a very big topic. I do believe you've had a few forays into this area. Preston, you dip your toe in it from time to time, I'm led to believe. But one of the interesting things I find today when it comes to sexual ethics, pretty much the idea is, as long as it's consensual, it's okay. Literally, consent is the only thing you need for good sexual habits and practices. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb and say I think there is a little bit more to it than just consent. Don't get me wrong, I think consent is a very important thing. We should be teaching it in college and schools, that type of thing. But I think there's more to a good sexual ethic than just consent, and this is something that the Bible speaks to. And I have been had a wry smile on my face where I see these young people saying, you know what, I'm starting to get the idea that maybe hookup culture isn't all that healthy. Maybe I should only have sexual relations with people that I have a healthy emotional connection with. And I find, maybe that's leading to sort of healthy relationships as well, a healthier respect for my body and that type of thing. Maybe I don't want to just treat women as something to be used sexually, or maybe I don't want men just to see me as something to be used sexually. So maybe something a little bit more along the lines of some old-fashioned, chastity, maybe not full-blown kind of, Victorian era sort of prudishness, but the idea that gratifying all of my sexual desires may not actually make me happy in the long run. Maybe that's something that Christian values can speak into in a way that challenges, I think, a lot of progressive orthodoxy since the 1960s. And I think a lot of people are coming around that way to seeing simply gratifying all your sexual desires may not actually be good for us as human beings.
Yeah.
So I think those are two good examples how the Bible can challenge the ethos of the political right and the political left. And let me say, Princeton, if anyone watching this is not offended yet, don't worry, I've got some other things and we could probably get to them shortly.
Well, I think I think the Bible, we should come to the Bible with an expectation to be offended. Like, I think that is if we could say, a hermeneutical good position to start from. If we come to the Bible wanting it to kind of like agree with all of our presuppositions we're bringing to the text, I think we're coming to the text just from the wrong perspective. So, Mike, I'm so thankful for your contribution to the study of the Bible. You made it. You didn't just improve the accuracy of the notes, but you you spiced up the notes very well. You covered a really important topic of politics and the church, and you did so in a way that was academically very precise, but also very, very prophetic and very challenging. And I just love that perfect blend that you brought to the Bible. So thank you so much for your contribution.
Well, thank you for having me, Preston. I'm all about bringing the exegetical salsa to the study Bible taco.